Okay, Tim, good morning. How are you? Wonderful. My name is Talent. I'm going to be your facilitator for this risk assessment training. Okay, so with you there, you do have a learner guide, each one of you. Then there is an course terms and condition disclaimer, that paper. I will give you a chance to go through it later, at a later stage, okay? Then there is an assessment as well there. That's a portfolio of evidence that will be utilized after everything. Then you to check that you really understand, you write a test. So our unit standard for the training is the 120330. It's 4 credits. It's NQF level 3. So currently this training is expiring, which means after every 2 years you have to refresh. But by 2026, there is, I'm not so sure if there can be an extension under CETAs, but at the moment, key CTO is taking over for these HIRAC trainings. So it will be longer training, but no expiry. It will be considered as an occupational certificate. So that is the current development in the training. So this one that we are doing currently, 2020 what 7, it will be expired, your certificates that you are going to get. All right. So before we look on our light, I just want to summarize the whole concept, because as long as we heard about we are doing hazard identification, risk assessment, I think a lot triggers into our mind in terms of workplace hazards. On daily basis, we are living in a world where there are hazards. Like, for example, if we look at the environment at the moment, it's raining, the surfaces became so slippery. So that is how hazards arises. Some hazards are not permanent. They can just arise due to conditions. Some hazards are permanent hazards, which can only be solved by having what? Personal protective equipment, because we can't deal without them. For example, machineries. If we just say, guys, let us go back to the Stone Age or the Iron Age, where people cannot use tools, because tools, it's a hazard, but they also have a leverage because they assist us. But now they can be a hazard when they are improperly used or they are not properly maintained. They can become a hazard on themselves because they use power to source them. They can have even unexpected hazards that can come from the use of machinery, but we cannot work without them. So now that is where we can end up having what? Corrective measures to say, no, if you are using this machine, we can't take away noise from this machine, but we need it. Wear plugs, ear plugs, or wear earmuffs. No, guys, we are working with welding machines. Fumes are produced in the workshop, and we can't work without a welding machine. Guys, please wear what? Respirators, wear dust masks. So that is the picture of hazards. So we are going to look muchly on hazards and how are they identified? How do we identify them? Then we look at how do we assess the risks which are associated with the what? With the hazards. So that is what we call HIRAC. So HIRAC stands for hazard identification and risk assessment. But the idea of doing all this is to have control what? Measures. Because an hierarchy is not complete without control. So after teaching you how do you identify hazards, how do you assess them, then we need to teach you how do we control them. So that is what we are looking at today. So just to give you any know-how or a light in terms of exactly what we are going to just scrutinize, we are going to look at, I think you know that in each and everything that we do at the workplace, it starts by planning. I think you have heard about what we call plan, do, check, act. So we plan, then we do what we have planned for. Then we check if it is what? Effective. Then from there we do what? We act accordingly. So that is a corrective action now to correct where. So it gives us a what? A continuous development, a continuous improvement as a company. So the reason why hierarchy is being carried out is to emphasize and to encourage the implementation of health and safety at workplace. Because if we identify, we alert people. If we identify, we'll be able to control. But you can't control something that you don't know. You cannot tell people awareness about something that you don't know. So the first step is to understand it, knowing it. So now, each and every company under what we call the OHS Act 85 of 1993, Section 7, requires every company to have a health and safety policy. But health and safety policy cannot be possible and it cannot be effective without risk assessment, because risk assessment is the one which gives us the pointers of exactly our areas of focusing so that we can address those issues and create procedures based on that. So Section 7 requires us to have a health and safety policy, but it comes from what we call a baseline risk assessment. So we have three types of risk assessment. We have what we call a baseline risk assessment. You have your safety officer. Safety officer's duty is to do what? Is to do baseline risk assessment. So baseline, we are talking about a thorough. Let's say if I have to give you an example, if you are looking at a baseline at government level, they are looking at from Cape up until to Limpopo, which means we are covering the whole of what? Of South Africa. We are covering everything to say, okay, guys, generally, what are the problems we have in South Africa? Then they say, okay, guys, we do have problems because we have vehicles which are traveling on roads on daily basis. So vehicles have got problems of this and this and this and this and this and this. They say, okay, guys, what can we do to address this issue? Let us create a ministry which deals with what? With roads. Then that is when they create a minister of road and transport, isn't it? Then that minister now will now have to administer regulations. Those regulations, what are they doing? They are controlling the activities of road users, as well as those who must provide services to those roads. So they are regulated. So whatever that they do is from the what? From the regulations. But us now at company level, we cannot regulate. We cannot create. Yes, we can have our internal laws, but we call them procedures. Or you can have your internal laws, which are rules for your company, isn't it? But those rules, they are regulated by what? By the ministry now. Depends on what we are doing. So when we are looking at baseline risk assessment, we are now looking at activities that we are doing. Then each and every activity we look at, it falls under which regulations. So now, which means whatever that we're going to create as procedures is aligned with the what? The regulations. So if the regulations say no company can operate without a hot work permit if you are carrying welding work, so who are we not to do that? Then it means as part of our procedure, now we'll say hot work permit is a requirement before welding, grinding, any hot work performed. Then we create a procedure of obtaining that permit. So we are getting it from the what? From the regulation. So that is how a baseline risk assessment is done. So it's something that covers the whole company, starting from the cleaners, your administrators, getting to the workshops, your welders, your those who are cutting, those who are lifting, machinery operators, your company vehicles, your facilities as a whole. So it's covered through the what? The baseline. So if you have clients that you service at their site now, it means now from the baseline we have a creation of what we call a task-based now. Because we know that when we go to our clients, we are performing tasks. Then they will create what we call a task-based risk assessment. So that is a number two, a risk assessment. So task-based risk assessment is just oriented for a certain what? Task, not more than that. So if it is for welding, it's just for welding at that certain place, not here. So we cannot take a task-based risk assessment for the workshop and apply it to your clients when you go to Limpopo to do a service, isn't it? We also have to do a task what? Based risk assessment. So task-based risk assessment is mobility. We always have to move with it and do it at certain places before carrying any task. Then we have continuous risk assessment. That is the third one. Our continuous risk assessment is made up of a lot of things that we do, like your machinery inspection checklist. Your machinery inspection checklist makes part of the what continuous risk assessment, because according to the driven machinery regulation, it says these machines must be inspected pre-use, during use, after use. So which means this is a risk assessment, because if they find a fault during the inspection, a fault means it's a hazard, because that is not the original state of something. So it has to be assessed before people they start what working. So that's where risk assessment comes in now. So when they are inspecting a machine, they say, okay, the machine has got hydraulic leaks. Having a hydraulic leak is a hazard, but sometimes it cannot stop the whole work. It has to be assessed now to check how bad is the leak, what can be done in order for a person to work while the leak is existing. What are the precautionary measures that have to be done? Then that is when they can say, okay, guys, so only the mechanical department can do that, because they are qualified to do that. Then they assess and say, no, guys, according to this is just a minor leak. So as it is a minor leak, we can accept it while we are calling the people to come and service it. So, but when you are working with it, always check your hydraulic oil. Otherwise, after every 30 minutes, just check the level for your hydraulic oil. Then make sure that you have presently you have your spillage control kit. It can be your sawdust, so that regularly you have to clean to control the spillages, and make sure that the area is barricaded where this machine is working to avoid slippery surfaces for others. So it's a control measures. Then a person can work under those measures. But if there was nothing like that, people were going to work normally. So that is their continuous risk assessment. So continuous risk assessment give us an alert, as well as to always improve and create control measures before people are exposed to a risk. So that's a continuous risk assessment. Our first aid inspection checklist, which are done monthly, makes part of our continuous risk assessment. Our fire equipment inspection checklist, our good housekeeping checklist, they make part of our our continuous risk assessment. Your permit to work systems. Remember that document. Whenever you inspect the hazards and all those things, makes part of our continuous risk assessment. Structured parts inspection, whereby you check that do we have machinery guards, they make part of our continuous risk assessment. So continuous risk assessment is something that is done on daily before use, even before you get to this boardroom. I think they have inspected, isn't it, to check if everything is fine, the environment is suitable, the air conditions are working, the lights are working, isn't it? Because you cannot just book something and say people get in, then we get into dark. That is a hazard. So that is why on daily basis we perform what we call a continuous risk assessment. So what we are going to focusly look at is continuous risk assessment. Okay, so that is